Good morning and welcome to the American Public Works Association's Talking Top Tech webinar series. Today's panel discussion will be 1 hour in duration and is titled Talking Top Tech, Autonomous and Connected Vehicle Edition. My name is Rita Cassada and I will be your facilitator today. I am an education manager at APWA. I have a BS in Mechanical Engineering from Kansas State University and an MS in Engineering Management from the University of Kansas. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Kansas, and before joining APWA, I served as the Public Works Director for the City of Lewisburg, Kansas. A recording of today's program will be available in the APWA Members Library within 1 week. APWA members can log into the library to access the content free of charge. Due to the free form format of this program, it is not eligible for CEUs. Today's session is interactive, so if you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the chat pod. You may do this anytime throughout the program. If you are in full screen mode, you will need to minimize the window to access the chat pod. After the program, please join us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. A link was included in your program instructions and is on the screen now. Now it's time to introduce today's panelists. Brad Rutherford is Vice President at Local Motors, the developers of Dolly, a self-driving electric vehicle. Brad has presented on the topic of growing opportunities in systems integration technologies for connected and automated vehicles. Brad currently resides in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. He received his industrial engineering degree from the University of Tennessee and his mechanical engineering degree with a focus on manufacturing from Pellissippi State Community College. Mike Grigsby is the Vice President of Marketing and Technology for the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority and former CIO for the Kansas City Police Department. He has been involved with numerous innovation efforts throughout the Kansas City region, including leading several transportation and public safety technology initiatives. In addition to his work with the KCATA, Mike serves as a member of the Kansas City Smart City Advisory Board, KC Tech Council Board of Directors, and advisor to the University Innovation Fellows at William Jewell College. Mike is a veteran of both military and law enforcement. His undergraduate studies are in engineering and information systems, and he holds a Master of Business Administration degree from Washington University in St. Louis. Andrea Eales is the Director of Government Affairs for the American Public Works Association and leads the Washington, D.C. office of the association. She has 23 years of professional experience working in politics at the local, state, and federal levels. This includes campaigns, the U.S. Senate, the National Association of Counties, Georgetown University, and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Andrea currently leads APWA's Government Affairs Department, which is responsible for advocating for APWA's public policy priorities to the U.S. Congress and federal agencies. Tim Austin is a licensed professional engineer and principal with the firm of Caw Valley Engineering, where he is the Wichita office manager. He has been experienced and successful manager in both public and private sectors. His diverse work experience over the past 34 years in the engineering and construction industries has provided him with a unique perspective and has honed his public relations skills as he interacts with the media, the public, elected officials, and other public and quasi-public boards and bodies on a variety of topics. His current interest is the potential impacts that autonomous and connected vehicles may have on public health, safety, and welfare. He currently serves APWA's Transportation Committee as the chair of the Connected Vehicles Subcommittee. He also served as task force chairman for NSPE's Autonomous Vehicle Task Force. He is a member of APWA, NSPE, and SAE International. And our final panelist is Brian Cronin. Brian is the Director of Office of Operations Research and Development for the Federal Highway Administration. In this capacity, he provides executive leadership and guidance for improving and advancing transportation operations-related technologies and innovations through research, development, and testing. Brian has a master's degree in civil engineering from Texas A&M University and a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from Virginia Tech. Brian is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Maryland. APWA is delighted to bring you such knowledge and experience. We are going to start the program with each of the panelists giving a brief overview of how they are involved with autonomous and connected vehicles. Brad, would you go first, please?
Thank you, Rita. Again, my name is Brad Rutherford. I'm the VP of Sales for Local Motors. Specifically tasked with development and rolling out of the OLLI programs. I also sit on the 10 Smart Advisory Committee. I'm also the treasurer for that committee, so we look at it as a state level, how we move and get autonomous vehicles into the area. Local Motors is basically a technology company that is specifically focused at rapid innovation and getting new types of transportation out into the world. So we look very heavily at how autonomous vehicles work, how they integrate, and how we can educate and inform legislative, municipalities, and companies as to the use and the overview of how autonomous vehicles can integrate into their systems. That's kind of the short side of it, but I'll turn this over to, I think, Mike.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Grigsby. I'm with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority. We are a public transportation regional authority sitting right here on the state line between the state of Kansas and Missouri. We cover roughly 9 counties and 119 different municipalities for our transportation services. In 2017, when I came on board for the KCATA, we started and kind of launched into our research activities for autonomous vehicles. We spent a lot of time researching the different types of vehicles and researching the different types of services possible, but found that that was getting the cart a little bit before the horse. So we backpedaled a little bit and began spending a lot of time looking at policy and other players that are going to be needed. APWA, in fact, is one of the other ones that we've got. In 2015, Kansas City started its sprint into the smart city space by launching the Kansas City Smart City Advisory Board, of which I'm one of the members. In 2016, we launched our first smart city corridor, which included kiosks, lighting, fiber, and Wi-Fi. 2017, we began exploring the autonomous vehicles, and we worked with the policymakers to begin identifying special districts and different corridors we could do. One of the other players that we worked with heavily was our Metropolitan Planning Organization, and they established an autonomous vehicle task force, also of which I'm a member. This year, the Kansas City Chamber moved transportation into one of its big 5 initiatives, meaning that transportation now impacts all initiatives coming out of the Chamber. This is important because it brings the right players to the table, including transportation as a forethought instead of an afterthought, and autonomous vehicles has been a heavy part of that conversation. Looking at next year, we are, the KCATA is looking to launch its first either pilot or real course for a real route for autonomous vehicles. And one of the things we did earlier this year was we identified a kind of an innovation corridor that I think has a lot of potential to help not only us identify what those problems are going to be and kind of work out the kinks to any type of autonomous vehicle deployment, but it also brings a lot of other players to the space and provides kind of a playground, if you will, for a lot of those ancillary services that dovetail into this. So a lot of good things on the horizon for Kansas City.
Thank you, Mike. Andrea, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Rita. Good morning. My name is Andrea Eales, and again, as Rita said, I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the American Public Works Association. In government affairs, our primary function for the association is to track legislation that Congress is working on that may impact public works, as well as to represent APWA's interests to Congress with regards to public policy. We also, in government affairs, track federal regulations impacting public works as part of our federal level engagement and representation. And we educate APWA's membership about what Congress and federal agencies are doing that may or is already impacting public works. Autonomous vehicles in particular is included as part of APWA's transportation public policy document. And for everyone's awareness, all of APWA's public policies may be found at apwa.net under the Government Affairs tab. During this congressional session, so far there are two primary pieces of legislation that have been and are being considered. In the House last September, they passed H.R. 3388, known as the Self-Drive Act, and there is a Senate companion bill, S. 1885, the AV START Act. In the Senate, they have been quite a bit behind the House in that the Senate Commerce Committee has considered S. 1885 and passed it out of committee, but the full Senate has not yet added the bill onto its calendar for votes and consideration. We can dig into why a little bit later as we get more into the specifics on the legislation. If both bills were to become law as they are at this time, they would have the federal government preempting state and local laws with regards to regulating autonomous vehicles, and the primary agency for that would be the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We appreciate APWA member input on all public works related policy issues as it helps us to do our jobs better. And we find it helpful to hear from members about any direct experiences that you may be having with autonomous vehicles and how they are and will change public works. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Tim, would you like to go next? Tim, would you like to speak about how you're involved with autonomous and connected vehicles?
Sorry about that, Rita. Thank you. I forgot to hit that mute button. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for the reminder, Rita. Again, I'm Tim Austin. I'm the chairman of the subcommittee of autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles as part of the APWA Transportation Committee. And our goal or mission, I guess, as the subcommittee is to look at the technology, where the industry is heading, both from a private investment standpoint, what's private industry utilizing, how's it being applied in the public sector. As you can see from Mike's earlier commentary, a lot of applications and things that are happening on multiple fronts across communities. But there's still a great amount of uncertainty. Certainly the vast majority of communities don't have the capital requirements or the staff to deal with a lot of these issues. And so there, to a certain extent, there's a lot of unknown information that's out there. And as a goal of the subcommittee is to help our members to understand the technology, educate them, so they can make good decisions for planning and future investment. The AV-CV subcommittee is representative very represented by different municipalities and industry individuals geographically across the country. As we know, there are different challenges that are presented in terms of the communication infrastructure, depending on where you're located, your geographic conditions, your environmental or weather conditions. And so it's good to have as many eyes on, if you will, and input into some of these issues. We've been meeting for a little over a year now on a regular basis, and probably the two biggest challenges that we see, and just very broadly, is the lack of standardization, if you will, on the technology that's being used. 5G technology is not ubiquitous, although a lot of people throw the term 5G around as if it were, but there are many different applications being used, communication applications within 5G, and so certainly something to understand and see how it's being applied. With that technology, is it's constantly being improved on. We all know kind of the analogy is when you buy a computer, it's outdated by the time you buy it. So certainly can be applied in some of the technology that's being rolled out and being utilized. And so the question then becomes, what do we do on the public side or the owner side of the transportation industry? Concern about what technology, what infrastructure should we be investing in? Is it going to be stuff that it's a lost investment cost that it's going to have a very short-term life, especially given the budget cycles and on how long it takes to implement changes? It's something on the public sector that we want to look at. The technology as it continues to evolve, especially as the smart city moves forward, concept moves forward across the country, huge data requirements. Do we have the infrastructure in place? Is the sensory array, will it be accommodated? And what's that cost, and how's that going to be funded? And so that's another aspect that the committee is looking at. But those would be, right now at the moment, probably the two biggest challenges in just trying to get our arms around what this all means for most of the communities. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Rita.
Well, thank you, Tim. Brian, would you like to go next?
Hi, thank you. I'm Brian Cronin with Federal Highway, and I'm at our Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center. As Director of the Office of Operations Research, I'm primarily in charge of our connected vehicle research, the vehicle to infrastructure side of the department's connected vehicle research program, as well as our automation research. My office is focused mostly on operations, but I'm a lead point for Federal Highway for our automated vehicle research at large. So, predominantly in the connected vehicle side, we've moved towards developing how infrastructure can communicate with vehicles, and we could share data or like traffic signal timing data or highway infrastructure information about work zones or incidents or various features like that. AASHTO is pushed forward for something called the Signal Phase and Timing Challenge, where they're trying to get every state to implement a 20 intersection corridor that provided this real-time signal timing data using dedicated short-range communications to vehicles. And so our office has provided a lot of resource material that AASHTO and ITE and others have used to try to work with states and cities to implement and test out and deploy some of this connected vehicle technology. On the automation side, we are Federal Highway issued a request for information earlier this spring, and a couple of the main things we heard from industry was about the need for uniformity and the potential for that to help out automated vehicles. And so we're trying to understand, well, what is the impact of that on lines and striping and signing, and what we may need to do or consider related to that, recognizing that it would be a significant challenge to upgrade our infrastructure and pavements, and what is the right level of maintenance that we need to do. So that's a dialogue we'll be having with the industry, and what's the appropriate role for the states, and what's the federal role. We're asked to really help encourage a dialogue between state and local agencies, as well as what I'd call the automation industry, whether that's the traditional automaker or new players into the field like Local Motors and others that are creating these vehicles that are going to operate on our streets. And so with that, Federal Highway started a national dialogue. Actually, our first event is today. I think it's actually starting in parallel with this in Detroit. But we'll have several other sessions throughout the country on various topics around policy and planning, safety, infrastructure, operations, and digital infrastructure. And I encourage you to try to attend and get engaged as we look through that. Lastly, from my office, what we're really thinking about is sort of the long-term impact of automated vehicles as they enter into the system, and operationally, will they operate slower? Will they operate the same? Could we use automated vehicles and communications technologies to enable them to platoon and follow each other more closely and safely, and thus increase the capacity of our existing infrastructure by putting more vehicles through? So we're in the works of doing testing and development. We've done some off-road testing. We have done various different on-road testing, and continue to look to partner with industry to help accelerate introduction of automated vehicle technologies safely into the system. With that, thank you very much, and happy to be here for this session.
Thank you, Brian. Now we're going to go into our question and answer part of the program. So please send questions to the chat pod. We have some questions that were submitted in advance, and we're going to start with those. But happy to answer any of the questions that we have time for, and we can continue the conversation on LinkedIn afterwards if we can't get to all the questions in the hour. So the first question is for Brad. How soon will we see Eales in major cities?
That's a good question. Actually, we've already delivered 2 of them, so we've got one that's actually with a tire company doing development testing, and then we have another one going to Buffalo. We have a few more going to Greenville, South Carolina. Some going to Jacksonville this year. We've got one going to Adelaide, Australia, as well as I believe we got 1 or 2 going to Dallas, and if I looked at my list correctly, I think we've just confirmed that we've got a few going to, I believe they're going to be going to Canada later on, late this year.
Okay, great. Mike, question for you. Can you expand on some of the strategies for bringing autonomous vehicles to the region of Kansas City and to the United States? Mike, we can't hear you at the moment. Could you try again?
Sorry, I still that mute button. Apologies. That's probably the best question that you can ask is what's the approach that we take to implementing and deploying this type of technology? I think one of the first things that we need to do is just consider that this isn't going to all happen at once. It's not like next Tuesday there will be no old cars and all autonomous cars. So how do we integrate them as a rollout? How do we do this in large swaths? But then also, how do we encourage municipalities and regions to look at this as small pilot opportunities? What Kansas City has done is, together with the Metropolitan Planning Organization, we've created an autonomous vehicle task force. What's nice about that is using the MPO, who already has all of the regional relationships in place. It's more easy for them to bring together the players that, whether they are already in the know or are in the process of getting in the know, these are certainly your biggest players in the area and the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on how to roll these out. What we've done on that task force over the last year and a half is we've started by kind of taking the end from the beginning and then walking backwards to kind of identify a strategy and a methodology for how we'll do this. So we've identified Areas of interest include infrastructure, data management, environment and land use, travel demand management, system performance, economic and workforce opportunity, and we need to think about that, the impact to operators of public transportation now and how they might be displaced or certainly challenged by autonomous vehicles. And then equitable access. We still have Title VI issues that we've got to work through, and how is that going to play into it? And then certification, liability, and policies. Who's going to be the owner and take responsibility for accidents and things along those lines. These are things that we're working through as a task force, and I highly encourage you, if you haven't already started this type of task force, beginning now is not too late, but it is certainly definitely in the best interest of rolling these things out.
And a follow-up question, has it been determined how the improvements in the Kansas City region will be funded?
So that is also a great question. We are starting a lot of these things not having any predefined funding streams, which means we get to start with no restrictions, no constraints. We make it as big as possible. When you don't have any funding, you can make the funding as big as you want. So we really have, we've actually had a little bit of fun with this, thinking very big picture on what we could do if there were no funding limits. Once we make those presentations, then reality sets in. We start working backwards from there. But we have identified a lot of different P3 opportunities, public-private partnership opportunities, with different, I would say, non-traditional funding sources. This could be private sector. It could be grant funds that may have previously been used for something other than this, but looking at the, I guess, the requirements of that funding, we can certainly make an argument to where they could help here. So it has really stretched the creativity of the group, and funding is one of our key priorities to helping find out what the deployment and the rollouts are going to look like.
Thank you, Mike. A question for Tim about the subcommittee. Are you looking for more members for the subcommittee, and is there any specific knowledge that you require for members?
Definitely looking for more members, and no specific knowledge. I'm a firm believer in having input from multiple market sectors. You know, the biggest concern I always have is what don't I know that I need to know, and I think that holds true for all engineerings in our practice, and so we're open to adding new members, and input is very welcome.
Okay, thank you. A question for Brian. Given the diverse automotive industry groups and proprietary nature of their technology, what is the FHWA doing to coordinate or collaborate with organizations such as APWA, ITS, ITE, SAE, and others?
Great. That's a critical question and opportunity, as I talked a little bit about, the question that we received in the RFI about uniformity, and as the AV industry is creating different technology solutions to pursue automation, we do have to take into consideration, what do we do and how do our state and local agencies implement if, one solution works best for one technology and another for another technology, and so there's some big questions about how do we do that. And so our national dialogue that we're starting, we've had really strong coordination discussions with AASHTO and ITE and ITS America. I think we're really excited that APWA reached out to us about this event, and we'll be happy to discuss further about collaboration opportunities with you on this. I think that right now we're sort of in this dialogue phase where we're trying to really clearly understand the needs from our stakeholders so that we can start to direct our research and policy decision-making around automated vehicles and what we need to do to help facilitate safe implementation of automated vehicles. We do have some specific standards work we've been doing with SAE in particular. That's one mechanism that we do. And then on some of our connected vehicle and some of our automation research that we fund at the technical level, we've started a group to look at, well, there's two pieces. One is the Connected and Automated Vehicle Coalition that AASHTO and ITE and ITS America have, where we have state DOT and industry partners helping to look at deployment of connected and automated vehicles. But within that, we have what we call an infrastructure owner operator and OEM forum, in which we're bringing state and local agencies, states and then cities, and actually I see someone's typing in a question about Maricopa County, and they've been one of the groups specifically involved with us, representing on this IOO and OEM forum, where we have an opportunity to actually bring auto industry and state and local agencies together to talk through technical details around automating connected vehicle implementation and development issues. And so, happy to talk with you all further about, opportunities we should be trying to pursue to help APWA and your members engage with us as we move forward.
Okay. Brian, is there anything else you want to add about the Maricopa County question? The question was, Maricopa County in Arizona for the last few years has had a connected vehicle test going in Anthem, Arizona. Is this technology being acknowledged and incorporated into the autonomous vehicle?
Yeah, so that, when we, one of the things we Federal Highway have been exploring is sort of the merging of connected vehicles. So I call that sort of sharing of data between vehicles and between systems, whether it be the infrastructure such as what's going on in Anthem, where they're sharing signal timing data, and then predominantly with emergency vehicles, and then automated vehicles. So if you could send signal timing data to a vehicle and then automatically alter the brake and throttle, you could have vehicles more efficiently and safely approach and depart an intersection. Or if you could share work zone location information with automated vehicles, they might better be able to adapt to a lane closure. And so that's kind of where we're seeing sort of some of that connection, that in those difficult situations or in the just regular situations as identified by traffic signals, is if we can share data, that's sort of another sensor that could help these automated vehicles perform better.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. We have a question for Andrea. As a result of the NTSB report on the Uber pedestrian incident in Tempe, are you hearing anything on the legislative front in D.C.?
Yes, that's a very timely question. And unfortunately, the incident in Arizona is not the only one that has resulted in injury or death related to autonomous vehicles. In fact, since 2016, I believe there have been 4 incidents that are being investigated by NTSB. This issue is certainly given Congress pause in moving forward and has affected and contributed to the delay, particularly in the Senate. The Tempe, Arizona accident happened in March and a woman was killed, and that definitely set some senators aside and made them think, how are we going to address these challenges? From the safety perspective, from the ethical and moral perspective, how does an autonomous vehicle make decisions like a human being makes decisions? And that has contributed to the delay. We'll see moving forward, there is still talk that the Senate may pass its legislation that I talked about in the introduction as part of a larger must-pass bill, such as the Federal Aviation Administration's reauthorization, which they need to be working on this summer. but it is not entirely clear, to be honest. There are about 5 or 6 senators that really are trying to address this issue and cybersecurity issues, privacy issues, etc. So it is really a bit murky as to whether or not we will see action in this session of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question we had is for Brian and anybody else that wants to answer it, from Debbie. There was a lot of talk about traffic signals communicating with autonomous vehicles. But how are they performing with roundabouts? I think Brad or Brian, if one of you wanted to answer that, or both of you.
I'll start, and Brad could add in. And so one of the pieces that automated vehicles, or the development of that, is related to having some sort of, or at least a solution, have some sort of digital map about the existing infrastructure and understanding sort of the roadway that's coming ahead. And so, as a roundabout, without having any data to share in real time, but there could be a map that the vehicle has access to. Otherwise, it would, essentially be, following the striping and then using its radars and sensors to understand if there's approaching vehicles coming. But, it's certainly something that if there were connected vehicle technology where vehicles were talking, they could probably add some capability beyond just radar sensors to understand, what other vehicles are in the circle and might be approaching them. So it would mean kind of blending that sensing capability, whether that's radar and sensors that are on vehicles now or other sensing with sort of mapping and lane following technology.
I'll follow that up with, and I can tell you personally that our AV system is already doing roundabouts, and we handle them in a couple of different ways. Partially, we handle it from the standpoint of we use environmental sensors depending on the distance that we need to cover. It's not always going to be feasible as a V2V system, and depending on the speed of the circumstances, we'll put environmental sensors in, sometimes radar. We've used LiDAR as well. What we find out is that typically we have a much better system. It's much more robust when we use environmental sensors and types of things like that. It's not so much that we need to know where we're going in the roundabout as much as it is a standpoint of we need to know order of operation, and it almost goes to the same execution of a four-way stop. It's not problematic to actually navigate it. It's more problematic to understand the order of operation. As a human drives into those circumstances, we know which cars are there before us, so therefore we know when to go. So if we allow the vehicle to get the same sort of forethought, knowing that what vehicles were in that area before and are entering into that environment, it's a much easier problem to solve. And again, our autonomous stack system that we're currently using right now has been validated multiple times. It's been doing it in live environments for over 3 years. So we haven't had any issues with that. Again, as you move into higher speed type corridors and things like that, it gets a little bit more problematic. But that's just from a standpoint of being able to see out further. The vehicle sensor sets are, somewhat limited to about 90 meters. So once we go beyond that, we need environmental sensors to help us out so that we can see what's coming before it gets there. Again, not as problematic as most people think. And again, I think the important part of this conversation is to understand that, what we're doing on the AV standpoint, we have to communicate with not only Federal Highway Administration, but local and local governments and municipalities to help them understand how these vehicles can get better and what they need to get better.
Okay. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add about the roundabouts?
Yeah, Rita, this is Tim. Just wanted to kind of a side comment, if you will, on the maps. So recently in some of the news with the automotive industry, there's been some questions about the efficacy of the maps that some of the industry is relying upon. And so it would appear that, at least on the private side, we're kind of seeing a convergence of map making in the quality and the updating the maps. I have a number of shared stories of trying to follow the cell phone GPS map maker on some of my travels, and it doesn't do a very good job. And so I think there's some concerns there, and like Brad was saying, there's also some publications, recent news, where some of the industry is actually trying to use a sensory array that would not rely on maps at all, that the vehicles would be able to operate without them. So again, it's something, different technologies have different capabilities, different manufacturers and developers have different capabilities, and just something to keep an eye on and be aware of.
I'd back that up with one other comment as well, and again, this is a big part of our system is when we talk to municipalities and everything, and one of the bigger differentiations in what we do as opposed to some other ways of doing it, our system can be GPS denied. So we actually can localize our vehicle and figure out where it is and what it's doing without having to worry about cell phone networks, 5G, 4G, any of those. We can do it without it. We can get within a 10 centimeter square area of definition of where we are without any GPS location at all. We've done it, 3 miles underground just to prove the point. So again, it's one of those things when we talk about these types of technologies, a lot of this stuff is, bleed over technologies in some instances from military applications and things like that, but they have a relevance in making these systems available to municipalities and governments to help them understand that if they can do these things without having to heavily rely upon infrastructure or communication network upgrades and things like that, it makes these much more applicable. But again, there's a very fine line of understanding that we have to be able to communicate with everyone. I think I tell everybody the same thing whenever they come and ask me, what kind of things do I need to put in the environment? Well, first off, we need to look at it. And the second thing I tell them is you need to prepare for everything. It could be 5G, 4G, satellite, cell phone. You have to kind of look at it. I think Brian was talking about AASHTO. One of the wonderful parts about being part of the 10 Spark Consortium is the actual chairman of AASHTO right now is John Shearer. And John is very adamant that these types of technologies have to work not only in rural environments, but also in heavy congested areas. So that's one of the things that we work very heavily to try to understand is what the municipality's capabilities are, but also how these technologies can be integrated no matter what the circumstances are. So again, just kind of looking at it in a broad overview, those types of systems are coming online and they're getting very, very robust, and a lot of these technologies are 20 years old. So it's not that we're playing with anything new, but we're bringing it into a commercial environment now.
Okay, thank you, Brad. We have a question now about what is the thought about data privacy and security? And I'll go to Mike and then Andrea, and then if anybody else wants to add in, we can do that next. But Mike, do you want to answer that question?
I think the first comment on that is going to be that this is an ongoing conversation. It's an unfinished conversation and one that's continually being had at every level, local, regionally, state, and federal. One of the first things with regard to security is the premise right now is that a lot of that security is going to be pushed back to the OEMs, with oversight from a federal perspective. Bringing it back down to a local level, one of the things that Kansas City has done is here recently, just because of the initiatives that Kansas City is involved in and kind of the profile it has in the smart city space, Kansas City has become a playground, if you will, for a lot of different players to bring new technologies that they want to test out. And then Kansas City, I know of at least 7 or 8 different pilot programs that Kansas City is involved in at a regional level. And these include data type projects with major cellular carriers, with a lot of data analytic companies. In particular, we're working on a project right now with Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary with Alphabet Company. We're working on some things with Android technology. And data privacy is at the center of all of those conversations. One of the other things that has come up with regard to the data privacy itself is the notion of data waste management. I know that may be a kind of an unfamiliar term to a lot of people, but the autonomous vehicles are collecting so much information on a daily basis. We have to begin thinking about what we do with the data that we don't need, and what the sensitivity of that data is, and what the concerns are surrounding that. How do we properly dispose of that information, or somehow archive it in such a way that we can gain access to it at a later date, but then also make sense of this. So there's a lot of computing power that's needed to crunch through that, and the policies around the privacy is certainly one that we have to pay attention to. So I don't want to overgeneralize it, but this is an ongoing conversation, and it's at the root of, our policy is at the root of the answer to this question.
Thank you, Mike. Andrea, do you want to talk about that question as well?
Sure. I can add from the congressional perspective and how they're addressing cybersecurity. As Mike just stated, this is a hot topic related to autonomous vehicles at every single level, local, state, and federal, and also in the general public. And as we all know, Congress reacts to what they hear from their constituents, and the privacy concerns and whether or not the data could be hacked into on an autonomous vehicle is something many members of Congress hear about on a consistent basis. And is, you know, in addition to safety, probably the other biggest worry that most consumers have at this point. So the House passed bill with regards to autonomous vehicles states in their bill that it would provide that no highly autonomous vehicle or vehicle with partial driving automation could be sold domestically unless a cybersecurity plan has been developed by the automaker. And these plans would have to be developed within 6 months of enactment of the bill if it were to become law, and would include a written policy on mitigation of cyber attacks, unauthorized intrusions, and malicious vehicle control commands. Also, a point of contact at the automaker with cybersecurity responsibilities, a process for limiting access to automated driving systems, and the manufacturer's plans for employee training and for maintenance of the policies. In the Senate bill, which again has not been passed by the full Senate, they also would require written cybersecurity plans to be issued within 18 months of enactment of their bill should it become law, including a process for identifying and protecting vehicle control systems, detection and response to cybersecurity incidents, and methods for exchanging cybersecurity information. A cybersecurity point of contact at the manufacturer or vehicle developer would have to be named, just like the House bill. However, unlike the House-passed bill, the Senate bill S. 1885 would direct DOT to create incentives so that vehicle developers would share information about vulnerabilities and would specify that all federal research on cybersecurity risks be coordinated with DOT. Also, the Senate bill would establish a highly automated vehicle data access advisory committee to provide Congress with recommendations on cybersecurity issues. Federal agencies would be prohibited by this bill from issuing regulations pertaining to the access or ownership of data stored in automated vehicles until the advisory committee's report is submitted. So that's where things are coming out legislatively at this point. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Andrea. Brad, a question for you about the Eales and using 3D printing to make the parts. How many of the parts are 3D printed, and how long does it take to print those parts?
So currently, right now, the Eales is about 30% printed. Production time on the different parts, it just kind of varies a little bit. Where it's kind of going though, and actually I'm kind of looking out of my office right now, and I can actually see the largest additive printer in the world being built right now. So it has a floor space of about 10 feet by 40 feet. We'll be able to print 90% of the structure by the end of this year. So once we move to that type of construction methodology, the lower half of the vehicle could be printed in about 8 hours. The upper part printed about an hour and a half. Final assembly of a rolling chassis about 18 hours. So we could theoretically roll a vehicle per day out of additive manufacturing side.
Okay, great. And then let's see. The next question is from Salim. Is there any work in progress on infrastructure intelligence, such as pavement friction, congestion data, etc., that can be communicated to automated vehicles? Looks like Mike can comment on that, and if anybody else wants to, just let me know.
I can't answer the question directly, just simply because I'm looking at it from the implementation standpoint. But that question is certainly one that we are contemplating and trying to understand better from a public transportation standpoint. One of the things that we see kind of a progression of connected vehicles first, electric vehicles second, and then autonomous vehicles third, as far as the deployment and kind of a progression on this. What we anticipate getting from the connected vehicles is a lot of telematic information from the vehicle itself. So this could include road conditions, it could include driving information, driver patterns. It could include things such as infrastructure needs in and around our stops. So this is certainly a conversation that we're having and anticipating with all of the vendors, or we're putting out to all of the vendors what the type of information we're going to get back from those vehicles. When we talk about things like understanding driving patterns, this goes right back to public safety. Can we make those kinds of improvements? It also goes into wear and tear on the vehicle. Can we sustain and maintain and kind of elongate the lifespan of those vehicles? And that goes back into training programs, right? So if we find that we have certain type of driving patterns on a particular road, it could speak to an infrastructure issue or it could speak to a training issue. So getting that kind of information back from the vehicles is crucial. I also know that there are players out there that are looking to put sensors in the roadway itself. There's a company here in Kansas City called Integrated Roadways that is building communications into the road itself. So the road would communicate not only with the vehicle, but the road could communicate back to Highway Patrol, or not Highway Patrol, but DOT, Department of Transportation, and other entities, what the traffic is like, what congestion patterns are, and things along those lines. So Brad may, as an OEM, Brad may have more to comment on it, but I know certainly from our standpoint, we are asking those same questions, and we see a vital need to have those answered.
Yeah, I think for the manufacturing standpoint, not so much that we want to be a extension or a sensor for the people that are responsible for transit. It's nice. It would be great, but we also understand the cost of putting environmental sensors in. But from our standpoint, we want to be an extension of it. So if our vehicle has impact sensors on it, which it does, we can actually measure the road surfaces daily. So if we're traveling over the same surface day in and day out, we can alert DOT that we're measuring a deformity in the pavement that's getting exponentially bigger over a period of time, and relay that back to them and let them know you need to send a road crew out. We got a pothole forming or some other issue in the environment. So we look at ourselves and we're trying to understand how we can be a tool for DOT and transit in general to not only monitor their environment but make it better. So we're actively trying to have those conversations to understand what kinds of things that we need to do to make sure that these types of vehicles can be an extension of it. And again, the other part of it is, the environmental side is going to catch up. We'll make the roadways smarter, but again, as these vehicles go around, they're recording tons of data. And it's really, we feel it's our responsibility, more or less, to be able to give that environmental data back to the people that are managing those areas.
Thank you, Brad. Question for Andrea. Is there currently any funding available for infrastructure improvements needed for autonomous and connected vehicles?
Thank you for the question, Rita. A very common one, and as with most things, funding is the biggest barrier to deployment of new technologies. In recent years, though, the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation have released grant funding that entities can apply for to test this technology and how it relates to various facets within infrastructure. Included in the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act law that was signed into law by President Obama in December of 2015. There is funding in there as well. That law is authorized through 2020, and periodically federal agencies release requests for input and also requests for application to various programs. The best way to track those, we try and highlight them through our advocacy news and Washington report that we release and share with our membership, but also going to the individual agency websites such as USDOT and Department of Energy is important as well. And of course, over the past 2 years since the 2016 presidential campaign, the infrastructure has been a huge focus of conversation, and both presidential candidates at the time spoke to the fact that infrastructure would be a top priority. President Trump continues to speak to infrastructure and wanting to deploy new technologies. Again, Congress is very interested in deploying new technologies and providing funding for it. But one major, massive $1.5 trillion infrastructure package that has been discussed has not yet come together. So there have been pieces, millions and millions of dollars passed in smaller bills, and also in the omnibus spending bill that was passed in March and signed into law by President Trump has funding in there for infrastructure as well. There's, again, this breakdown between local, state, and federal responsibility, and funding matches is the big barrier. But yes, short answer is there is some funding out there, but certainly not what is needed to widely deploy this technology, and also the infrastructure necessary to support the technology and make sure it is successful. I hope that helps some.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. We just have a few minutes left, and we've got some questions that we haven't been able to answer, and we'll include those in our LinkedIn feed, so we'll get those questions answered if people haven't been able to get their questions answered. But I wanted to go around the panel and ask just quickly, what do you think transportation will be like in 10 years or 20 years? Brian, would you go first?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think that it will be safer and continue to provide a lot of different mobility options and choices. I think automated vehicles are definitely going to be a larger proportion of the vehicle fleet than they are now. I don't know that they'll be the entire proportion of the vehicle fleet by then, given the turnover rate for vehicles, but I think we're going to continue to see new service options and mobility choices, and in general a safer system. Thank you.
All right, Tim, would you go next, please? The question was, what does transportation be like in 10 or 20 years, Tim?
Sorry, I had that mute again. So just real quickly, I kind of echo Brian's comments. I think we're going to see a lot of different mobility issues. Certainly it's going to be different on the coast where you have high density of the human population versus maybe those in the plain state. But it's going to be really interesting to see how transportation evolves, but I think it's going to be a little bit of everything.
Okay, Andrea, do you want to answer that question as well?
I don't want to take the easy way out, but I will. I agree with both of them, actually. I think transportation will get safer. I think the needs of rural areas versus urban areas are very different, and the way that autonomous vehicles are deployed and utilized in those areas and paid for will be different. But there's a lot of smart people out there, and I think a combination of all levels will help it to be more widely used in the next 10 years, excuse me.
Okay, and then Mike, same question.
I'm going to jump on a comment Andrea made, is that I think we're going to see some significant strides made in the rural areas. I think there's going to be big changes in areas of density as well as municipalities begin trying to figure out how to tackle congestion problems, especially in downtown areas. We'll see kind of concentric circles beginning in those urban cores, extending outward, and policy is going to change a lot. But we're going to see a lot of the same and a lot of different. So it's going to run the gamut for sure.
All right, and then Brad, do you have anything you'd like to add on the question?
Sure, I'm probably going to take a little different spin on this one, but it's just from the OEM's perspective and our business models. And Adam Jonas, who's probably the most well-respected AV electric vehicle analyst for the New York Stock Exchange currently. Both him and I both agree on one thing. The business model is changing very, very rapidly for auto manufacturing in general. So I think this kind of helps everybody kind of round this up, is that transportation is turning into the new utility. If we're going to look at how we're going to manage it, or we're going to look at the business model of what the OEMs are doing, we're decreasing the amount of models that we're making. We're also going to subscription models, and we're looking at fleet ownership. So if that's the case, and we're looking at transportation in general, I think everybody has to view it as a utility, not as much as personally owned vehicles. We're looking at different types of advanced mobility, ride sharing, those types of activities. So I think if I had to tell municipalities and local government how they should look at it the way you would look at electric utilities or you know, an LPC, a local power company or something like that, because that's a realistic viewpoint of what's going to happen to the automotive industry within the next 5 to 10 years. So if we start putting those types of planning and management functions over it, then you start seeing a much different business model on how we're going to have to deal with it in general.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate everybody's answers. And that's all the time we have today for our program. And I want to thank Brad, Mike, Andrea, Tim, and Brian for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. This is Rita KCATA, and it's been a pleasure moderating this program for you today. I want to call out a few things to your attention. On the top tab of the presentation, there's several tabs, and one of them is a speaker bio tab if you want to learn more about our speakers. And there's also a tab for a reporter article about the top 5 tech for 2018 for APWA that was done in the March Reporter. So please check out those tabs in the presentation. And please remember to fill out the evaluation form. The link to the survey is listed on your program instructions and is on the screen now. And registration is open for the next program in this series, Talking Top Tech Asset Management. It's scheduled for July 19th on a Thursday. It will be later in the day due to international participants, 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific. Recording of today's program will be available in the APWA members library within 1 week. APWA members can log on to the library to access past Click, Listen, and Learn conference content and Talking Top Tech content free of charge. After today's program, please join us in the LinkedIn community to continue the conversation. The link was included in your program instructions and is on the screen now. I thank you for your attendance and participation during this program, and we will answer the questions that were asked and we didn't get time to answer them on the live program, they will be answered on LinkedIn throughout the next week. So please check that out, and thank you for your attendance, and have a great day.